Hey guys, tonight we slip into the misty dawn along the Nile's riverbank, where you trudge through reeds heavy with dew and hear the low hum of wild bee colonies hiding in riverside sycamores, and you probably won't survive this sweet-toothed lesson if you think honey just appears on toast. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You crouch beside a cluster of mud and straw nests, tucked into a knotted tree root, the air alive with buzzing insistence. Each honeycomb cell glints like a tiny drum beckoning you closer. You slip on simple leather gloves. Bee stings have a way of turning busy as a bee into screeching like a banshee. Joke one, you could say beekeeping is the original sting operation. Around you, palm fronds rustle, and you imagine ancient gatherers in reeds, just like you, learning that wild honey harvests first blossomed in Egypt as early as 3000 BCE, when jars of golden sweetness began appearing in tombs as food offerings for the afterlife mainstream fact. The buzz settles as you gently pry a beehive's entrance wider, slipping in a woven wicker basket to catch dripping honey. The scent is thick nectar pollen and a whisper of river mud. Your tongue tingles with anticipation, but also with unease. Was it bees or crocodiles that Pharaoh feared more? You watch amber drops pool in the basket's base. Joke two. It's the only time you'll cheer for your honey to be whipped. Historians still argue whether early Egyptians practiced migratory beekeeping, moving hives seasonally along the Nile to follow blossoms, or simply tended fixed nests near temple groves. Scholarly debate. You recall how priests dedicated apiaries to deities like Nile, and some fringe tales claim that beekeepers chanted hymns to bee gods to calm the swarms. Quirky tidbit, one account suggests they even used animal dung as smoke fuel to lull angry bees, though it probably just made everyone gag. Back on your feet, you trudge toward stacked clay jars nestled in a shaded grove. These hives, called tramped, are early inventions that let Egyptians ratchet up honey yields. You heft a jar with care. Its surface is sculpted into rings so bees can grip a clever flat medieval perspective in clay. You pour a fingerful of honey onto your palm and taste the golden rush of palm tree nectar mixed with date flower essence. It coats your tongue like liquid amber. Joke three. If only your dentist were as ancient as these beekeepers. The grove around you hums with life. Dragonflies flicker above standing water, and the Nile's gentle swell reminds you that floodwaters once brought nutrients to crops and pollen to bees. These seasonal inundations shaped beekeeping schedules. By flooding the floodplain, farmers inadvertently set blooms in motion which wild bees followed to build their hives in reeds and trees. Historians still argue whether the annual inundation made honey production more reliable or simply added chaos to an already sticky operation. Scholarly debate. You pause under a saffron-cloaked fig tree, dip in a wooden bucket into a carved wooden trough to rinse stray comb bits. Your gloves dampen, and you catch a whiff of fermented nectar, proof that fermentation was a danger even before mead. Beekeepers learned to filter honey through cloth, straining out debris and wax bits. The result: clear, viscous syrup worthy of tribute. As dawn paints the sky in russet and indigo, you trudge back to a low platform of palm logs where temple officials await with wax tablets. They stamp jars with royal seals. Pharaoh's approval means honey will grace the palace table and seal alliances with neighboring kingdoms. You set down your basket, its contents glinting in soft light. The taste of that stolen honey still lingers on your fingertips, a reminder that even in ancient times, sweet rewards demanded sticky work. You slip along the sunlit courtyard toward a low reed-thatched scriptorium where scribes crouch over papyrus scrolls weighed down with carved wooden batons. The air smells of ink reed pens and beeswax, a fitting aroma for studying hives. You push aside a woven screen to reveal shelves lined with jars of honey and bundles of papyrus inscribed with looping hieroglyphs. Your fingers brush the margins where tiny bee symbols hover like secret signatures. Joke 1: who knew ancient Egyptians had both bees and autocorrecti? A burly scribe in indigo robes gestures you forward. He unrolls a scroll titled Instructions for Apiary Placement, its top edge fraying like the edges of a honeycomb. You kneel beside him, leaning in close as he traces a reed pen along the hieroglyph for bee. The text explains that hives should face east to catch the morning sun and be placed on raised platforms to keep predators like snakes and scorpions at bay. Mainstream fact Egyptians used wooden stands called SSTD to elevate hives 6 palms off the ground, a measure recorded on tomb walls dating to the Old Kingdom. You imagine sweat trickling down your back as you lift a hive to perch it on a fresh painted stand. The scroll continues outlining the ideal distance between hives, about 2 cubits, so swarms don't clash over nectar sources. You nod, remembering how too close stacks once led to royal banquet disasters when rival swarms waged war over date blooms. Joke 2: apparently even honeybees adhere to personal space. The scribe flips to a second papyrus, detailing the best season for honey collection immediately after the inundation receded, when acacia and sycamore trees bloomed. You trace the phrase, month of thought, with your fingertip time for harvest. The calendar note reminds you that beekeepers marked months by lunar cycles, tying their work to both sun and moon. Though historians still argue whether those lunar guidelines were strictly followed or simply idealized in temple records, scholarly debate. A fringe tidbit catches your eye. A marginal note claims that whispering the royal name near hives kept bees calm, an odd ritual that might have been pious reverence or early propaganda. You imagine chanting Pharaoh to a buzzing swarm, a practice so theatrical it could double as a performance for visiting dignitaries. The scribe shrugs, noting that some beekeepers swore by it, while others laughed it off. You help unroll a third scroll across a low wooden table. Here, instructions for harvesting read like a hymn. Use an iron fire tong to lift the lid coax bees into calm with smoke from dried palm leaves, then gently scrape honeycombs into wicker baskets lined with soft linen. The papyrus warns that too strong smoke like henbane or dung could kill the bees outright, an unfortunate mistake that once forced a chieftain to import hives from Syria. Joke 3. Nothing says sweet diplomacy like foreign bees. The scroll ends with a list of tools: iron fire tongs, woven smoker boxes, carved wooden bowls, and reed brushes for sweeping stray bees. You eye a polished bronze tong set, wondering if the cold metal ever stung more than the bees. Around you, the scribes exchanged nods as though each stroke of ink bound you deeper into this sticky profession. Stepping back, you pause beneath a carved lintel featuring a bee god often identified as Neith or Re. The goddess's wings arch like protective hives over a pair of stylized bees. Priests once dedicated apiaries to her, believing she blessed both hive and keeper. Mainstream fact-tomb reliefs at Beni Hassan depict queens overseeing hives, suggesting beekeeping held both economic and religious significance. You leave the scriptorium and wander the temple precincts where beeswax candles glow in iron fire tongs, illuminating murals of apiary scenes. One fresco shows workers pouring honey into clay jars shaped like lotus petals. You imagine carrying those jars through dawn mist, the lotus shape, reflecting morning light. Yet the murals also hint at terser truths. Occasionally, workers fell victim to angry swarms and were buried in mass graves. A grim reminder that beekeeping could be lethal. By the time you return to the apiary grove, the sun hangs high and your tongue still tastes ink and honey. The papyrus notes reel through your mind like a sacred litany orientation spacing smoke and ritual. You feel privileged, part keeper, part scholar, tending both bees and knowledge. But you also feel the weight of those hieroglyphs, each stroke preserved by centuries of devotion and debate. You crouch again by a clay skip, sliding in a reed basket to catch stray drips. With each honey-laden comb you lift, you recall the scribe's words, the hush of the scriptorium, and the faint echo of bee gods' hymns. Your hands are sticky, your cloak flecked with wax, and your heart is sweetened with the taste of ancient wisdom. The next phase of harvesting awaits, but for now the scrolls have given you both guidance and wonder. You trudge along the riverbank as the sun breaks through morning mist footprints, sinking into mud that smells of ancient silt and new promise. The Nile's great inundation has receded, leaving the floodplain a patchwork of damp earth and fresh greenery, ideal real estate for wild bee colonies. You crouch beside a stand of papyrus reeds, tracing your fingers along scalloped leaves still slick with water, and recall how those annual floods brought nutrients to fields and nectar to flowers alike. Mainstream fact for centuries, Egyptian beekeepers timed their apiary work to the inundation, knowing that the receding waters unleashed blooms of acacia, sycamore, and sunflower that sustained the hives. You slip through a corridor of blue lotus blossoms nodding in the breeze petals, dusted with pollen, drifting like golden confetti. Each bloom holds a fleeting sweetness, a nectar banquet that bees follow in swirling flight. You watch a knot of foragers dip into a flower, their striped bodies shimmering in russet and indigo light. It's a delicate balance, too early and flowers drown in silt. Too late and drought withers the bloom. Joke one, who knew honey production required timing more precise than your grandmother's Sunday roast? Beyond the lotus, you find the river's old terrace where wild hives cling to cracked limestone overhangs. You climb carefully, boots crunching on oyster shells left by ancient riverbeds, and peer into a hollow where bees hum in solemn chorus. Their entrance is a tiny oval keyhole surrounded by waxy residue. You poke a length of papyrus stem inside to coax out a drop of honey, but the cells are still full of brood proof that these colonies bank on flood-born blossoms for brood rearing before the harvest. Fringe tidbit: some beekeepers claimed that wild bees would migrate upriver when the flood peaked, following water lilies like an all-you-can-eat buffet. Though modern scholars still argue whether bees truly drifted by boat or simply relocated within the same grove, scholarly debate. You ease down to the terrace floor, careful not to crack the limestone, and sip water from your leather flask, still tasting faint resin from the scriptorium's pine pitch. You breathe deep-tasting mud and pollen on your tongue and imagine that ancient swarms navigated the Nile's currents like tiny sailors. Nearby, a reed basket brims with acacia blossoms gathered for experimental hive placement. You recall how beekeepers scattered flowers before hives to lure swarms into new clay skips. Migratory beekeeping wasn't just about following natural blooms. It involved planting your own forage, a clever twist on ancient agriculture. Joke too, way before game farms, Egyptians had floral marketing. You stand and survey the floodplain water-stained dikes, dividing fields, paddle-driven boats on side channels, and distant herds of cattle grazing on nutrient-rich grass. Each element ties back to apiculture, cattle dung spurred insect life. Boats ferried clay skips. Fields of barley gave way to sweet clover, another bee favorite. Historians still argue whether beekeepers alternated between fixed apiaries and mobile hives on reed barges, or if such raft-based practices were merely a romantic exaggeration in poetical tomb epitaphs, scholarly debate. Either way, you sense ingenuity flowing like the Nile itself. A farmer in saffron robes appears scythe slung across his shoulder and a wicker bucket of river water in hand. He tips his hat and you nod. His fields are dotted with orange calendula and crimson mallow plants introduced centuries earlier from the Levant to spice up both jars of honey and temple gardens. The calendula bloom, a fringed tidbit from the papyrus scrolls, supposedly brightened the honey's color, though some think it was merely a bold marketing ploy. You watch as bees flit between mallow and clover, a psychedelic dance of indigo and russet bodies. The farmer leads you to a stone-lined canal where seawater used for cooking was once diverted for fish ponds, but now left behind silent pools. Here wild thyme and mint colonize the banks, offering bees a spicier bouquet that ancient perfumers sought for sacred ointments. You pluck a sprig and grind it between your fingers. The minty aroma leaps into your nose. The plants, and by extension, their essential oils, were prized in temple apothecaries for embalming, hinting at surprising crossover between honey harvest and the afterlife. Joke 3. Nothing says rip in peace like mint-flavored honey cakes. You follow the canal to a raised wooden boardwalk, an elevated walkway built to protect hives from seasonal flooding. The planks are weathered gray, but the carved glyph underneath still shows a bee and the word for prosperity. You step onto the boardwalk and feel each plank flex. The design speaks to forethought, preventing hive drownings when floodwaters lingered in low spots. Without these walkways, some apiaries would have sat submerged, the bees forced to abandon or drown, a tragedy sketched on temple reliefs. At the boardwalk's end, you find experimental clay skeps painted in ochre stripes to emulate river reeds. You lift the lid and dip a reed brush to sweep out a small comb, the wax cells still wet with early season honey. The taste is lean acidic like wildflower wine, but you sense latent sweetness. You imagine ancient apprentices testing these skeps, comparing yields and recording results on papyrus. They were the first agricultural scientists blending flood cycles and floral calendars in a quest for the perfect jar. As the noon sun climbs, you spy the scriptorium's columned portico across the marsh, a reminder that knowledge and practice marched hand in hand. You secure your basket and turn to trudge back boots, leaving tracks that will soon be washed by evening tides. The Nile's rhythms, like your own heartbeat, set the pace. Seasonal floods and floral floods alike shaped every drop of honey Pharaoh savored, weaving beekeeping into Egypt's very heartbeat. You step into the honey grove just as the midday sun warms the earth, the dappled light glinting off rows of newly crafted clay skeps stacked like sentinels in the breeze. Each pot rounded at the base, tapering at the top, bears horizontal ridges to help bees climb inside a design that only makes sense once you've watched a swarm hesitate before tackling a smooth surface. You crouch beside one fingers, brushing the cool terracotta, and recall that clay hives first appeared in Egypt around 2500 BCE, offering a durable upgrade from woven straw baskets' mainstream fact. A beekeeper in a russet tunic arrives carrying a basket of fresh reeds. He threads a loose thatch through the skep's top openings, creating a subtle entrance barrier to deter wasps and rodents. Trumdi murmurs in ancient Egyptian, naming these hives in the local tongue. You watch as he cements the reeds with a bit of wax and pitch, sealing cracks with layered precision. You imagine the first beekeepers fashioning these pots by hand, spinning coils of clay beside the Nile and firing them in open pits. It must have felt like conjuring living vessels out of mud. Joke one who knew beekeeping involved more pottery than your high school art class ever did. You lift one skep's lid, revealing a honey-packed comb neatly cradled within. The scent is richer here, an intense bouquet of acacia and date blooms redolent with the promise of sweetness. You dip a finger into the comb, tasting the concentrated nectar that drips like golden syrup. It's sticky enough to snag on your glove, but it's the kind of mess you're happy to wear. Nearby, a fringed tidbit emerges from whispered gossip among the keepers. Some rustic skeps were fashioned with tiny windows of animal horn to monitor brood development without disturbing the bees, a technique that sounds ingenious, until you wonder how many keepers stuck their fingers through the wrong whole scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether these windowed hives were common tools or simply exotic contraptions reserved for temple workshops. You rise and step between the rows, admiring subtle color variations in the clay saffron streaks, mingling with natural terracotta tones. Each skeps stands on a stone plinth to deter floodwater and mold their bases carved with tiny feet so air can circulate. You bend to inspect one base, noticing ring and dot glyphs painted in shell gold symbols, invoking Ninth's blessing for hive protection. Joke 2. I'd say these skeps have more security features than your average medieval fortress. The beekeeper beckons you to help relocate a swarm. A young colony, still temperamental, buzzes inside a wicker skep he brought from an old season. You set a clay skeps on its stand, then position the wicker skep next to it. With gentle coaxing and a puff of mild smoke from dried lotus leaves, chosen for its scented calm, you invert the wicker over the clay, encouraging bees to migrate downward. They pour into their new home in a shimmering cascade, filling the ridges and crevices with frenzied energy. You press your ear to the terracotta, listening to the deep hum within. It resonates like distant drums, a living vibration that underscores the hive's pulse. You recall that ancient Egyptians believed the hive's heartbeat was a divine echo, linking bees to solar rhythms and temple chants. You smile at the notion you're practically budget temple architect now. Walking to another cluster, you find beekeeper scribes marking hive loots on small wooden tablets. They notch lines for each jar extracted, balancing yield against brood preservation. One scribe passes you a tablet inscribed with 9 notches today's harvest. You tap your finger on the wood, feeling the carved grooves. The practice ensured beekeepers never overharvested and jeopardized colony health, a sustainable protocol centuries ahead of its time. Joke 3. These bees basically had their own union rules. Further down, an experimental skeps catches your eye. Its lid is domed and glazed in pale indigo, a subtle departure from the usual unglazed pot. The glazing repelled moisture during midday fog, the bees adapting to smoother interiors for cleaner honey. You trace a gilded flourish, tiny bees circling lotus petals, and wonder if this was a one-off royal commission or an early sign of hive design innovation. You stoop beside a moss-lined trench where old skeps lay discarded their walls, broken from shrunken clay or flood damage. You sift through shards, marveling at the skill it took to center each coil and shape uniform ridges. Terracotta fragments glimmer with embedded pollen remnants, ancient time capsules that you could nearly taste if you closed your eyes. As the sun arcs past zenith, the beekeeper invites you to share lunch-fresh goat cheese drizzled with honey straight from the scapes. You tuck into the creamy curd the honey's complexity, floral, nutty bright, transforming the simple cheese into a culinary epiphany. Each bite feels like a handshake across millennia, a reminder that this partnership with bees sustained dynasties and fueled feasts. You rise, patting your belly, and return to inspecting skeps, checking for cracks, ensuring lids fit snugly, and noting which colonies will next receive water vapor treatments of smoke to ward off aggressive drones. The midday heat bakes the clay skep walls, enhancing internal circulations, thermodynamics you sense more than calculate. As afternoon shadows lengthen, you step back to survey the workshop grove, dozens of clay skeps, wooden stands, and reed baskets in harmonious order. The breeze stirs pollen motes like drifting gold dust, and you breathe deeply. This crucible of craft clay reeds, wax, and keen observation was a cornerstone of Egyptian apiculture, marrying artisanship with natural rhythms. You gather your tools, a bronze fire tongue, a reed basket, wax filter cloth, and trudge back along the path toward the scriptorium, each skeps suitably stocked. In your mind, You replay each ridge and glyph, each curve and flourish, realizing that these simple clay pots held the secrets that sweetened Pharaoh's table for centuries. You step beneath towering sandstone columns into the heart of the palace, where the air shimmers with incense and the distant clink of gold vessels. Torches flicker along frescoed walls depicting gods accepting honey offerings, their outstretched arms dripping hieroglyphs of sweetness. The marble floor feels cool against your leather sandals, and you trudge forward carrying a woven basket of freshly sealed clay jars, the very skips you helped refill by the floodplain. This cargo is destined not for market, but for Pharaoh's table, a gesture that cements your place in the kingdom's gilded hierarchy. A procession of alabaster basins rests on raised platforms, each one already half filled with pale amber honey. You dip your finger into the nearest basin, tasting its complex chorus of acacia date palm and desert wildflower notes, smooth as silk, but with a bite of candied spice. Mainstream fact honey was considered so precious that during the Old Kingdom, pharaohs received regular honey tributes from provincial governors recorded on temple stelae as part of the state's annual offerings. You imagine those governors kneeling before the throne jars, glinting in sunlight like liquid gold. At the far end of the hall, a low dais supports a throne carved from ebony and inlaid with lapis lazuli. Nearby, court officials in indigo and saffron robes whisper amongst themselves, eyeing each jar as though it were a jeweled treasure. A chamberlain in a teal mantle approaches relief carving of a bee adorning his belt buckle. He lifts a jar with delicate reverence and examines its seal, a gilded scarab stamped in shell gold, an emblem of rebirth and prosperity. You meet his gaze, summoning a nod. Joke one, I guess. Opening this jar would be the royal buzzkill. The chamberlain beckons you forward. You carry the jar on a wooden tray, its edges polished smooth by decades of use. As you step through a curtained portal, you feel the hush deepen. Within the inner sanctum, Pharaoh sits on a dais of ostrich feather cushions, his linen kilt gleaming with gold thread. Sunlight filters through high windows, illuminating his ornate collar and the pile of honey jars before him. He holds out a slender spoon carved from silver, its handle shaped like a lotus blossom. The sight of pure honey swirled on silver stirs your heart as much as any promise of reward. You approach and present the tray. The spoon dips into the jar, lifting out a glistening ribbon of sweetness that drips back like a molten gem. The taste on Pharaoh's tongue is a politics of flavor, sweet diplomacy in every drop. Joke two. Forget crown jewels. This is the real treasury. Behind you, a scribe in russet robes records the event on papyrus looping glyphs that will forever tie your harvest to royal favor. Pharaoh's smile is slight but satisfied. He raises his spoon in your direction, a rare gesture of personal thanks that sparks gratitude in your chest. Around the chamber, priests fan incense smoke into spirals, their chant a low hum that syncs with the beat of your pulse. You recall earlier hymns to Neith and whisper your own quiet prayer of thanks to the bee gods who guided your combs. Quirky tidbit fringe lore claims some pharaohs bathed in honey-infused water to preserve their skin, though historians still argue whether such luxuriant baths were real royal routines or later exaggerations by steamy romance scribes' scholarly debate. After the tasting trays of honey-lace cakes and date mead goblets appear set upon bronze tables, you sample a square of dense sesame honey cake, its crumbs studded with toasted seeds and scented with cinnamon imported from Punt. Each bite is a reminder that honey in the palace is both sustenance and status. You lean toward a nearby guard in saffron and whisper, "Best meal you'll get all season, eh?" He grunts agreement, crumbs dusting his beard like golden pollen. A courtier glides past holding a basket of cosmetic jars meant for the queen's chamber. The lids snap off to reveal pale beeswax mixed with crushed coal and ground ochre early Egyptian eye makeup that owes its smooth glide to honey's emollient properties. Wax for wicks and cosmetic cakes, indeed. You recall that beeswax fueled temple lamps and lent sheen to noble faces. Now you see its role as beauty ally in full display. Joke 3. Nothing like a little beeswax eyeliner to deter political conspiracies with style. Pharaoh rises, signaling the end of the ritual. You step back, bowing deeply as officials collect the empty jars for recycling clay shards destined for new skeps. Each broken pot will be ground, refired, and reborn, much like the monarchy itself. As you leave the chamber, the hum of beesong fades into palace echoes. Yet you carry the buzz within a personal drumbeat that reminds you how honey weaves through every layer of power grain, tribute, ritual, and art. Passing through the courtyard's palm shadows, you glance at the Nile's distant gleam. The floodplain's offerings now sit sealed in royal vaults, a testament to your labor and the kingdom's intricate tapestry of agriculture, craft, and devotion. You straighten your satchel, now lighter, but brimming with the glow of accomplishment. The sweetness you harvested today will fuel celebrations, seal alliances, and perhaps sweeten the tongue of posterity. As dusk falls, you plant a final kiss on the crusted jar you've sealed your legacy with sticky resolve. Tomorrow the cycle will spin anew. Blooms will beckon bees, skeps will clatter, and Pharaoh will taste honey once more. For now you walk the shaded palace corridors, footsteps echoing like bee wings, carrying the weight of glory and regret in equal measure. You step into the shaded precinct of the temple, where massive limestone columns rise like silent guardians, and the air is thick with incense smoke and the faint drone of hidden hives. Flickering oil lamps cast gilded patterns on walls adorned with reliefs of winged deities, bees carved in perfect symmetry buzzing around lotus blossoms. Here, honey is more than sustenance, it's sacred. You pause before a shrine dedicated to Neith, her arms outstretched in protective gesture over a pair of stylized hives, and feel the hush of centuries weighing on your shoulders. A priestess in saffron linen approaches her hands carrying a silver alabaster basin filled with honey mead. She dips a carved wooden ladle, its handle shaped like a bee, into the golden mixture and pours a thin stream over an offering plate of fresh figs and bread. The honey mead glitters under torchlight, each bead a promise of divine favor. Mainstream fact, ancient Egyptians used honey and mead in funerary rites, believing its sweetness ensured the deceased's safe passage to the afterlife, as recorded in pyramid texts dating back to the 5th dynasty. You follow the priestess to a side chamber where jars of consecrated honey stand on low stone benches. Each jar bears a temple seal in shell gold and a brief hieroglyphic dedication to Hathor, mellifluous lady. The scent here is heady nectar incense and the subtle tang of myrrh. You open one jar, carefully tasting a spoonful on your tongue, floral warm, with a whisper of resin. The sweetness feels like a spiritual balm. Joke 1. If you thought self-care was modern, try anointed honey baths under a goddess's watchful gaze. The priestess beckons you to help inscribe a new dedication. She hands you a reed pen dipped in ochre ink. With trembling fingers, you trace glyphs that invoke protection for a newly crowned pharaoh, sun-drenched words that bind mortal and divine through honey's sacred medium. Fringe tidbit, some fringe texts suggest certain temples used fermented honey as a hallucinogenic sacrament to induce visions, though historians still argue whether those rituals ever truly existed outside whispered rumor. Scholarly debate. Beyond the chamber, you step into a courtyard where a stone basin receives honey offerings from townsfolk jars of all sizes, some small woven baskets, others large ceramic pithoi. A temple guard tallies each gift, marking clay tokens to record offerings destined for temple feasts and oracular rituals. The courtyard's air is thick with beeswax candles flickering in iron fire tongs, their light revealing beeswax drips along column bases. You bend to feel one drop smooth warmth on your skin, marveling at how temple artisans carved exquisite bee motifs into candle sconces. Priests gather for a midday ritual. One lifts a golden ladle of honey and pours it into the inner sanctum's altar fire. The flames roar sweet smoke, curling skyward like a jubilant hymn. You watch as the smoke drifts through a lattice window, carrying prayers and bee spirits to the heavens. Honey, the high priest, intones, bridges worlds mortal and divine. You feel a shiver of awe. You wander to a small paved alcove where apothecaries have ground beeswax with natron and frankincense forming cone-shaped incense burners. Each cone bears a tiny bee carved at its tip. As the burners glow, they scent the air with honeyed smoke that lingers on your cloak. You inhale deeply, letting the fragrance mingle with your breath. Joke 2. Nothing says divine connection like smoky beeswax in your nostrils. As afternoon shadows lengthen, you join the temple's honey procession. Priestesses carry baskets laden with honey-lace cakes, palm mead flasks, and jars sealed with temple hieroglyphs. You follow, placing your contributions at the feet of sacred statues, a juvenile form of Horus Isis, nursing her son, and the scarab god Khepri, rolling the sun. Each statue glows under shell gold equinox rays, spotlighting sticky offerings at their granite feet. You step back, allowing the sacred honey to speak in its own language. Around you, temple musicians strike sistrum beads rattling like distant bees, and the chant swells. You close your eyes, tasting incense and honey on your lips, the temple's pulse syncing with your heartbeat. By sunset, the ceremony ends. You gather your robes, now dusted with golden pollen, and retreat through teak pillars to the river's edge. As you step into a small boat carved with bee motifs, you glance back at the temple silhouette aglow in torchlight. You realize this hive of worship, bees, priests, offerings, was the kingdom's spiritual apiary, nourishing both body and soul with its sacred sweetness. You stride into the bustling tax collector's courtyard at dawn, where wooden tablets clatter like ledger pages, and the sharp scent of beeswax mingles with tanned leather pouches being weighed. Farmers in indigo robes line up, each clutching earthenware jars of honey or woven baskets heaped with wax cakes. You wedge your satchel between your thighs and remove a smooth clay amphora sealed with saffron-colored resin. Today's levy, a tenth of your harvest, paid in golden honey that glints like tribute under the early sun. Joke one who needs coins when your bank is a bee. A clerk in russet linen stamps your amphora with the royal bee emblem and embossed glyph that guarantees acceptance at any provincial granary. Mainstream fact, during the Middle Kingdom pharaohs imposed a honey tithe on all landholders recorded on tax stelae as part of the state's granary system. The amphora joins a line of identical jars on raised racks, each labeled by nome and district, while scribes tally names on ostraca shards. No papyrus waste here. You recall how governors once bargained honey for grain and drought. Here's transforming liquid sweetness into life-saving staples. A fringed tale flits through your mind. Some provinces reputedly floated amphorae down the Nile as silent tax vessels, trusting currents and downstream officials to deliver them, yet historians still argue whether such riverborne levees were logistical experiments or romantic exaggerations in travel memoir scholarly debate. You shake your head and roll your amphora forward, preferring solid ground to watery chance. Nearby, a farmer in teal robes offers wax cakes, pale discs, stamped with the local temple seal instead of honey. Wax, you note, carried more value per jar weight and often substituted when nectar flowed too thinly. You lift a cake, its honeyed sheen, promising smooth lamp fuel and fine cosmetic base. Joke 2 wax was the Bitcoin of the Nile Valley limited supply, high demand. You join the courtyard center, where a bronze scale hangs between two posts, carved like stylized bee stalks. A clerk dumps his wax pile onto one pan. You set your amphora on the other. The scale's beam wobbles, then settles exactly equal. You step aside, heart thrumming with relief. Too little and guards would turn to iron shears. Too much, and you'd brand yourself a show-off. Balance is everything, even in honey tax. Around you, the hum of activity rises. Porters wheel honey jars and wicker baskets on wooden sledges, and a scribe calls out receipts in sing-song cadence. You scan the courtyard's periphery, spotting temple servants gathering levied jars for ritual use. Some honey is dispatched to granaries, others to shrine kitchens for honey cakes, and mead an economic web spun of bees. A court official in leather and gold strides past, inspecting jars like a vintner tasting wine. His frown suggests uneven supply. Some gnomes delivered surpluses, others scraped by on barley rations. Food shortages, you recall, could lead to revolt or worse, forced conscription into corvée labor along canal projects. The tax, while sweet in substance, carried bitter consequences when levied too heavily. You sidle up to a small ledger stand where a scribe tabs your district's yield. 120 jars, 10 reserved for temple tribute, 5 for royal granaries, and the remainder for local redistribution. You nod at the figures as though greeting old friends, grateful that the excess returns to feed your own warband's kitchens. Joke 3. Nothing cements loyalty like communal honey dip. As the sun climbs, the courtyard's hum shifts to a lull, and you collect your empty satchel, replaced by a receipt inscribed on a clay token. This token grants you passage to withdraw grain or fish from state stores when hunger strikes. Honey has become your currency, tax, and promise. You tuck the token into your belt, its notches a guarantee of survival. Walking away, you pass rows of amphoras stamped with every gnome's emblem, a mosaic of royal control. Each jar's both tribute and tool it funds, temple feasts, fills royal treasuries, and binds farmers to the crown's steady hand. You realize that honey's value exceeded its sweetness. It lubricated bureaucracy, funded expeditions, and built pyramids in more ways than one. Turning back toward the Nile's glint, you watch porters load honey-laden barges. The river's currents will deliver tribute downstream to Memphis and beyond, while you return upriver to tend hives for next season's levy. The cycle of blossom harvest and tax marches on a golden tide fueling Pharaoh's kingdom, sweet, unstoppable, and unavoidable. You slip through a narrow side door of the temple precinct into a dimly lit apothecary chamber, where shelves of alabaster jars glint like ghostly sentinels, and the air swirls with scents of myrrh galbanum and fermenting honey. A low table of carved ebony stands in the center, heaped with clay bowls of crushed herbs, reed stem mortars, and beeswax candles flickering in iron fire tongs. You perch on a short stool, watching the apothecary in a teal sash pour thick honey from a jar into a shallow dish. Joke 1, nothing says medicine cabinet like a vial of honey that doubles as dessert. She stirs the honey with a bronze spatula, mixing in ground frankincense tears, small fragrant droplets of resin prized for their antiseptic properties, and a pinch of powdered comfrey root. You lean forward, inhaling the sweet resinous aroma that reminds you of summer breezes over river mud. Mainstream fact, Egyptian physicians often used honey mixed with herbs as topical poultices for wounds, relying on honey's natural antibacterial qualities, a practice recorded in the Ebers papyrus around 1550 BCE. You watch a line of thick paste form in the dish, each swirl a promise of healed flesh. Next, the apothecary adds crushed lotus petals and a handful of rose hips to the mixture. She hums quietly, as though each chord soothes her bees more than her patients. Fringe tidbit: some apothecaries claim that lotus-infused honey could induce lucid dreams, visions of the afterlife, or divine counsel, though historians still argue whether those anecdotes reflect genuine shamanic rites or merely the romantic exaggerations of temple scribes' scholarly debate. You imagine drifting into a dream state after a spoonful, discovering secret tombs in your sleep. She ladles a dollop of the herbal honey onto a strip of linen, your makeshift bandage, and presses it gently onto a copper plate warmed by a nearby oil lamp. The heat softens the paste, its steam curling upward in golden tendrils. You touch the plate's edge, wincing at the warmth. She smiles, her own eyes ringed with coal. For hastening tissue repair, she says, tapping the plate. You nod, imagining packing this paste onto a knight's shattered shin, though you'd probably wail louder than he would. The apothecary reaches for a small pot of dried snail shell powder. Subtle grain flecks against the dark honey base and stirs it in. The texture shifts from glossy to gritty. Joke 2. Who knew your wound care routine would require appetizers for medieval escargots? But she explains that the calcium-rich powder was believed to strengthen broken bones when ingested slowly, a remedy spoken of in fringe medical scrolls, despite persistent debate over its actual efficacy. Shifting bowls aside, she retrieves a clay jar of fermented honeymead shibita and pours a thimble of the amber liquor into a new dish. With a mortar and pestle, she crushes mint leaves, caraway seeds, and black cumin seeds into a fine dust before blending them into the mead. The scent blossoms minty, caraway warm, cumin earthy undercut by a tang of sour honey. You sip a drop on your tongue, it tingles your throat, clearing cobwebs from your sinuses like a river breeze up the nose. She names it Windbreaker Elixir, a remedy for respiratory distress, common after long Nile drafts of dust and incense smoke. Mainstream fact, ancient Egyptian physicians prescribed honeymead infusions with herbs to ease coughs and chest congestion, as evidenced by prescriptions in the Hust papyrus. You taste the lingering heat on your palate and feel a whiff of lung expansion, as if tiny reeds in your chest are straightening. Next on her tray lies a slender reed brush and a jar of pure beeswax mixed with ochre and resin, a cosmetic medicinal salve for chapped lips and cracked heels. You coax a bit onto your fingertip and rub it along your own cracked lower lip. The wax melts into a smooth balm, sealing the skin against dry winds, an everyday miracle. Fringe tidbit: some beauty-obsessed Egyptians believed kissing someone wearing this honeyed balm transferred vitality, though scholars still argue whether this practice was courtly flirtation or sacred blessing. Scholarly debate. She arranges small beeswax candles in a semicircle around a bowl of hot water, spiced with cinnamon and coriander seeds for a fragrant steam inhalation. The steam rises, infusing the chamber with spicy warmth that makes your eyes water in the best possible way. You tilt your head into the mist and breathe slowly, feeling nasal passages relax. The apothecary watches, nodding in satisfaction. No gadgets needed, just honey's chemistry and a handful of reeds. As the steam subsides, she produces a final concoction, a small alabaster vial of honey vinegar tincture mixed with ground nettle and fig seeds. The color is murky gold, and the aroma is tart bitter, like pickled jam gone off. For digestive woes, she declares, gesturing to your midriff. You grimace, but take a pinch on your tongue. The sweet, sour burn flares in your belly, stirring ancient enzymes. The apothecary explains that the acetic acid in honey vinegar helped dissolve toxins after feasts of salted fish and heavy bread, a formula recorded in tomb inscriptions praising Imhotep's medical lore. By late afternoon, you've sampled every remedy, paste, elixir, balm, steam, tincture. Your tongue and fingers stick with honey glaze, but your mind buzzes with newfound respect for this sweet healer's art. Each recipe was a testament to observation bees' antibacterial nature, herbs' healing resonance, honey's preserving magic. You rise, offering the apothecary a bow and a final taste of pure honey whisked with powdered lotus, her gift. The sweetness lingers on your lips like a silent benediction as you step back into temple sunlight. Bees, worship, and medicine have woven themselves into a tapestry of health and ritual, a sticky network that bound healer and healed under Pharaoh's watchful eye. You trudge back toward the granary chest lighter. With each step, your furs less stiff, your breath less labored. The hum of distant hives seems softer now, as if bees themselves approve of these healing sweets. Tonight, when you rest beneath that pale moon, your dreams will taste of honey and herbs, a sweeter kind of trial. You enter the lamp chamber just as torchlight tilts against walls painted in ochre and indigo, the air heavy with beeswax warmth and the clink of iron fire tongs. Dozens of bronze sconces cradle beeswax candles, tapers carved with lotus motifs, each wick glowing like a miniature sunrise. You lean in, inhaling the sweet, honeyed smoke that curls in lazy spirals, and feel the hush of sacred nightfall descend. Joke 1. It's the only time you'll applaud indoor burning without worrying about fire marshals. A wax melter in a russet tunic stands beside a shallow basin of simmering water, a smaller clay pot nested inside to form a makeshift double boiler. He ladles molten beeswax into hollow reeds, spinning them on a wooden rack until each wick sets firm. Mainstream fact: Egyptians dipped reeds in pure beeswax to create the earliest candle wicks, a technique documented in tomb reliefs at Thebes and dating to the Middle Kingdom. You watch golden drips fall like slow-motion raindrops, each one a promise of light. Nearby, a table holds rows of alabaster jars filled with cosmetic cakes, pale yellow discs of beeswax blended with ochre and coal. A perfumer in teal robes picks up one cake and slices off a sliver with a carved flint blade. She crushes it in her palm, mixing in ground carnelian dust and resin, then molds it into a smooth eye paint paste. You stroke a bit across your eyelid. The color gleams like river water at sunrise. Joke 2. Nothing says battle ready like a fierce cat's eye. Historians still argue whether beeswax-based cosmetics were everyday fare for all free citizens or reserved strictly for temple functionaries and nobility. Scholarly debate. A fringe inscription in a minor tomb even suggests that some women painted beeswax masks onto their faces overnight, allegedly to dream of Osiris, though most scholars doubt those wax facelifts ever caught on beyond poetic myth. You pat a stray smear off your cheek, imagining Cleopatra's spa day would make modern influencers green with envy. You move to a rack of small lamps, shallow clay dishes brimming with pools of liquid wax and cotton root wicks. One craftsman lifts a lamp and tips it, the molten wax sloshing dangerously close to the rim. He snuffs the flame with a quick cover of his leather glove, then resets it with a steady hand. Each lamp casts dancing patterns of light that seem to animate the carved bee motifs on surrounding columns. The flicker feels alive, as if the bees themselves lend their glow. Beyond the lamp area lies a storeroom of ornate cosmetic boxes. You open one to reveal beeswax lip salve pressed into geometric patties scented with rose oil. A tiny reed spatula rests beside them. You gingerly scoop a sample and taste the floral sweetness on your tongue. The salve soothes your cracked lips instantly, proof that beeswax served as both art and medicine. Fringe tidbit: some texts claim that brides once wore beeswax lipstick stamped with their father's seal, a practice excitable enough to feature in comedic sketches at sunset, though historians still debate its prevalence. Outside courtly rumor, scholarly debate. Joke 3, nothing like sealing your vows with a swipe of Dad's logo. You wander to the apothecary's counter, where beeswax candles stand alongside jars of honey balm for scalp soothing. A herbalist in saffron robes dips a comb into warm balms, applying it to a kneeling initiate's hair to treat scalp irritations. The rich mixture of beeswax, castor oil, and crushed mint leaves is massaged in the aroma both sumptuous and herbal. The initiate sighs as if every knot and itch untangles with each needed stroke. A wall niche holds molds in the shape of scarab beetles and lotus buds. These once pressed warm beeswax into votive shapes for temple prayers. Worshippers would light the votive offering smoke to the gods, a sensory petition rising through flickering beams. You handle a lotus mold, its carved petals, minute and precise, imagining pilgrims pressing their own wishes into molten wax before setting them ablaze. Further on, a low bench holds inventory tags, wooden labels burned with the names of compounds, and their expiration dates an early form of quality control. You read aloud Ka and WTI of Bess honey wax enema, each entry hinting at burned-out candles, warding spells, and possibly cringe-worthy colon cleanses. Yet the attention to detail reveals a proto-pharmaceutical rigor, a testament to beeswax's versatile power. You step outside into a twilight courtyard where leftover wax strips are scraped into pots for remelting. Wax flakes glint in fading light like golden scales. You gather a handful, imagining them reborn as candles, cosmetics, or sacred votives. Each flake is a cycle of light and art, simplicity and sanctity, all rooted in the humblest hive. As night deepens, you return to the hall of lamps, each wick still burning steady. The honeyed scents and warm glow wrap around you like a promised beeswax, lit the way through tombs, palaces, and temples alike, guiding both soul and body. You pat your cloak now dusted with golden powder and whisper thanks to the bees. Their wax wasn't mere fuel or fashion, it was the kingdom's shimmering heartbeat, sweetening Pharaoh's nights with enduring glow. You trudge down the bustling stone quay of Yamu, Egypt's chief Mediterranean port, the scent of brine and fish mingling with the sweet tang of honey wafting from stacked amphorae. Traders in indigo and saffron robes hustle between reed-shaded stalls, unloading cases of clay jars bound for Byblos, Ugarit, and as far west as Crete. You shoulder a woven basket heaped with beeswax cakes, each stamped with the royal bee emblem, and navigate a labyrinth of camels' wagons and shouting porters. Joke one who knew honey logistics could rival a camel's hump day commute. A custom scribe in teal sits beneath an awning of striped linen, tallying shipments on a wooden tablet with swift reed strokes. You present ivory tokens carved with your district seal. They clink like tiny hive bells against the ledger board. Mainstream fact archaeological records show that by the Middle Bronze Age, around 1800 BCE, Egyptian honey traveled widely via Canaanite and Phoenician intermediaries, forming a lucrative export that anchored early Mediterranean trade networks. You watch as he stamps your token with an iron die, then waves you onward. Beyond the customs post, a row of clay amphorae stands on raised platforms to catch sea breeze, their pointed bases fitted into straw cradles. Merchant ships' crews haul jars aboard, tying them with reed ropes as deckhands secure sails. You climb aboard a sleek cedar vessel bound for Byblos, the prows carved with falcon motifs and gilded flourishes, ancient logos for ocean freight. Joke 2. Forget shipping containers. This is cargo chic. Below decks, you slip through a narrow hatch into a hold stacked knee-high with amphorae labeled A&W Egyptian for honey and Bezas, the Canaanite name for bees. The air is warm and sweet, a rising fermentation hint promising early spoilage if left too long. A ship steward in russet reins smooths out reed matting between jars, ensuring none jostle too harshly. He explains that honey's low moisture made it ideal for long voyages, resisting spoilage that shredded lesser perishables. Fringed tidbits some captains stashed hidden jars under the gunwale to avoid pirates believing bees buzzing would ward off boarders, though scholars still argue whether that tactic ever outfoxed a seafaring corsair or merely flustered crew scholarly debate. Above deck, you join merchants bartering jars for Greek amphorae of olive oil and Cretan wine. You deposit 2 jars of orange blossom honey, picking up a pair of tall vessels sealed with pitch and oak resin. The merchant inspects your honey, swirling a drop on his tongue and nodding appreciatively at its clarity and floral notes. You receive a handful of copper ingots, your payment clinking warm in your palm. Joke 3. Who knew nectar of the gods could buy a round of barley wine? By dusk, the ship slips from Yamu's harbor, past limestone breakwaters carved into lion heads, carrying sweet cargo to bustling Phoenician ports. On deck, you sip a measure of honey mead, mixed with local resin-infused wine, the brine breeze tugging at your tunic. Traders point out landmarks, limestone cliffs of Byblos, where cedar logs once built Egyptian temples, reminding you that honey was but one thread in a tapestry of trade that bound kingdoms. After a fortnight's sail, you disembark at Ugarit's wharf, a mosaic of traders from Anatolia to Nubia. Here, customs demands a small portion of your jars to fund temple feasts to Baal and Yam. You relinquish 3 jars sacrificial honey for storm gods, thankful they weren't sticky fingers grabbing them at knife point. Mainstream fact excavations at Ugarit reveal tablet archives recording honey offered to both Egyptian and local deities, underscoring honey's dual role as commerce and cultic gift. You wander the market where honey luminaries hang from tent poles drying in the sun until tacky enough to preserve spices and currants. A Mesopotamian trader offers to swap a sack of pomegranate molasses for your beeswax cakes. The scents blend sweet tart and nutty in a heady stew that makes your head swim. Fringe tidbit. Some itinerant apiarists reputedly blended local wild honeys into Egyptian jars and sold them as imperial blends, a precursor to artisanal honey marketing, though modern scholars debate whether such forgeries were widespread or mere rumor designed to shame greedy merchants. Scholarly debate. From Ugarit, you join a caravan bound for Emesa, hoisting jars onto camel saddlebows encrusted with dried pollen. The desert stretches before you, dunes rolling in saffron dusk like waves of sand. At each oasis, You rest the camels and refuel on dates and pomegranate cider, invoking protective prayers against scorpions, aiming for your amphorae. You tuck your cloak around the jars, using a leather strap to secure them against jostling. Joke 4. Nothing says suntan like lobster red honey jars. At Emesa city gates, temple priests purchase your remaining honey to anoint sacred statues of Sol and Shamash. They pour molten honey through silver funnels carved with sun symbols, their chants echoing down marble colonnades. You glimpse the jars sealed with a double bee and sun emblem, a hybrid logo, signaling cross-cultural sanctity. Mainstream fact: by late Bronze Age, honey's export elevated Egyptian revenues and symbolized diplomatic gift-giving between pharaohs and neighboring monarchs. Returning to Egypt by caravan, you cross Sinai's rocky passes, each amphora secured against camel's hump. Star-navigated nights reassure you that trade routes mapped by constellations tie back to the same skies above your river apiaries. You're reminded that honey's journey reflects Egypt's cosmic order. From Nile blooms to desert dunes, each jar is both earthly labor and celestial gift. At last, you unload surviving jars back at Yamu, their amber interiors slightly settled but still radiant. You count the coins in your satchel enough to fund next season's skeps and clay repairs. Each copper piece jingles like a hive in your pocket. You realize honey's path from temple honey to foreign markets has sweetened Pharaoh's treasury-forged alliances and woven Egypt into a network of humming commerce that spanned seas and sands. As the full moon rises over Yamu's harbor, you stand on the key jars stacked behind you like silent witnesses. The merchant sails are furling reed boats drifting home, and you feel the quiet pride of having steered honey's journey across the ancient world, one sticky amphora at a time. You slip through the cool dusk air into the quiet hush of a pharaonic tomb. Torches guttering along the limestone walls, their flicker casting dancing shadows over meticulously carved reliefs. Each step echoes like a drumbeat, guiding you deeper into this stone sanctuary where death meets art. You pause before a panel depicting rows of beehives stacked on wooden frames, workers tending to their bustling tenants under the watchful gaze of a regal overseer. The air smells of lamp smoke and ancient incense, cumbersome but comforting in its ritual familiarity. Your fingers hover over the reliefs tracing the delicate outlines of bees, mid-flight, their tiny bodies captured in perfect symmetry. Below, hieroglyphs identify the scene, harvest of sweetness for the king's afterlife. Mainstream fact tomb reliefs in the mastaba of Mereruka, circa 2350 BCE at Saqqara, actually show beekeeping scenes, confirming that honey was considered essential for provisioning the dead. You lean closer, marveling at the way stone becomes narrative, a silent hive carved in rock. Joke 1. Who knew that even in death, the Egyptians were still buzzing about beekeeping? A fringe whisper suggests that some tombs included hidden chambers where actual clay skeps were interred alongside the deceased, a kind of underground apiary for use in the afterlife. Historians still argue whether these soul-foraging hives ever truly existed, or if they're merely ghost stories told by guidebook authors with too much imagination, scholarly debate. You tap the wall, half expecting bees to emerge. but only find ancient dust settling in your palm. Moving along the corridor, you encounter a scene of ritual honey-pouring priests offering liquid gold into alabaster basins carved into the stone floor. The honey flows like a molten stream beneath divine symbols, pooling in lotus shapes etched to guide it. You crouch watching the artisan's hands etched in relief, imagining their slow chisels shaping both memory and theology. The smell of faint resin clings to the stone, a sensory callback to the temple's apothecary where honey-laced balms once healed mortal wounds. Joke 2. Apparently, the dead needed honey more than they needed Wi-Fi. As you continue, a deeper chamber opens into a vaulted niche adorned with vivid pigments. Ochre, ultramarine, and gilded highlights survive despite millennia of hush. Here the beekeeper himself is memorialized. A man garbed in saffron linen stands beside his clay skeps offering honey jugs to a seated noble. Tiny inlays of shell gold accent the hive ridges, a subtle glimmer that catches your torchlight and tickles your eyelid. You inhale tasting salt and smoke and feel a fleeting connection across time. Below this scene, carved hieroglyphs detail the beekeeper's titles and duties: Master of Bees, Harvest Warden, Sacred Sweet Provider. The precision of the carving suggests the beekeeping profession was held in high esteem, not dismissed as menial labor. Mainstream fact: ancient Egyptians classified beekeepers as skilled craftsmen under the estate of the god Nile, granting them a respected status, often hereditary. You imagine apprenticing in clay skeps and temple rituals, a sticky vocation more revered than many royal artisans. A fringe note tucked into your memory recalls a rumor that some tombs hosted live bees sealed within alabaster urns destined to serve the deceased in spectral form. Scholars still argue whether such necro-apiaries ever existed or if they were bedtime stories meant to spook grave robbers. Scholarly debate. You shudder picturing a swarm stirred by eternal offering rites. You stand back squinting at the winding reliefs that intertwine beekeeping with the cycle of life and death, bees born from lotus petals, honey flowing into the earth, souls guided by their hum. The tomb's artists carved not just scenes, but theological truths. Honey is eternal, as sweet in death as in life. The bone-chilling drips of your torch's smoke mix with reverent quiet. You feel as though you stand at the threshold between worlds. Joke 3. Who needs a passport to journey to the afterlife when you've got a jar of honey and a hive? In the final chamber, you encounter a colossal relief of a pharaoh holding a honey-laden scepter, its tip crowned by a gilded bee. The pharaoh's face is serene, an eternal taste of sweetness poised on his lips. Surrounding him are offerings of honey jars, beeswax candles, and honey cakes, all arrayed to power his soul's journey. The stone is worn at the pharaoh's fingertips, millennia of mourners pressing for favor. You reach out, gingerly placing a finger in the same spot, connecting past devotion to present wonder. The hush presses in, and you realize the tomb itself is a hive cells of memory where each carving buzzes with intent. You let your torch gutter, letting the reliefs soak in half-light. The bees carved in stone teach you that even the greatest life must prepare for sweetness beyond the grave. And that maybe, just maybe, the sting of regret can be soothed by honey's eternal embrace. You step back into the cool corridor, your heart brimming with veneration and that faint aftertaste of lamp smoke and tribute honey. The tomb's exit stretches before you, like a healed hive path guiding you back to the world of living, but carrying with you the sacred hum of stone bees, forever echoing the ancient congregation of hive and afterlife. You wade into the earliest light of dawn among the hives, a soft haze of smoke drifting from reed burners set at each stand's base. The smoke curls around your cloak, carrying earthy notes of charred palm fronds and a whisper of animal dung, a potent remedy that beekeepers swear calms the most irate swarms. Joke one, nothing says spa day like hosing down bees with eau de manure. This curious smoke ritual has been part of Egyptian hive husbandry since at least 2000 BCE, when farmers noted that certain densest smokes lulled bees into sedation, making honey harvest smoother mainstream fact. You hover over a clay skep, watching bees drift upward like drifting spirits. The smoke's acrid sweetness coats your tongue, reminding you that even in antiquity, apiarists experimented with every combustible under the sun. Nearby, an apprentice in teal bindles a small amulet around a hive, post a tiny gold bee engraved atop a lotus leaf. He whispers incantations S-A-I, stay, and J-M-N-W, calling on the west wind god to protect the colony from plague and locust. Fringe tidbit: some bee masters believed that burying a scarab-shaped amber charm beneath each hive would channel insect souls back to the earth if too many died, a practice recounted in Marginalia. Though historians still argue whether these amber charms were widespread tools or local superstitions, scholarly debate. You rub the back of your neck, imagining invisible wards shimmering beneath the hive stand. You step between skeps and catch sight of a reed smoker plugged with dried henbane stems, an odd choice given henbane's toxic fumes. Yet folklore holds that its soporific smoke induced mild trance states in bees, heightening honey flow at the cost of brood health. You wrinkle your nose as you watch the apprentice tempt the swarm heads, nodding like tiny pendulums, combs draped with slack workers. Journal entries in temple archives hint at ancient beekeepers debating whether henbane smoke's benefits outweighed its brood-killing side effects. And even today, scholars still debate whether such psychoactive fuel was ever safely or ethically used. Scholarly debate. Joke 2. Apparently ancient beekeepers were part apiarist, part mad scientist. You wander to a reed-lined corral where 3 olive oil amphorae stand inverted draft holes drilled into their sides. These are bee houses, experimental traps to catch swarms on the move. When a colony outgrows its skep, it seeks a new home. Beekeepers would leave honey-scented traps to lure the swarm, then quickly transfer combs to clay hives. Fringe tidbit: one dusty papyrus mentions using the skull of a deceased beekeeper as a spirit guide to coax lost swarms back home, though most scholars dismiss the idea as tragedy-driven superstition rather than widespread practice. Scholarly debate. You shudder, picturing ghostly hives haunted by ancestral apiaries. Along a sunlit wall, amulets dangle from pegs, tiny faience bees painted in lapis and gold strung on linen cords. Some beekeepers drape these over their wrists, believing the bees within will recognize the amulet owner and show deference while others press them into hive entrances as peace offerings. You pick one up, its glaze chipped, but its symbol undimmed, a bee poised over crossed lotus stems. You slip it into your pocket, feeling its cool surface like a promise that these bees might owe you a favor someday. Down an alley, beneath papyrus canopy, you find a narrow trench lined with copper coils. The coils heat reeds stuffed inside, releasing aromatic vapors of cedar and frankincense and incense that supposedly mimics the scent of royal offerings, coaxing bees to produce premium honey worthy of temple tribute. You breathe in the cedar's spicy warmth, noting how bees venture calmly from comb to comb, their hum more rhythmic, almost reverent. Apothecary scrolls whisper that this incense infusion's boosted honey yields by a third, though temple economists still argue whether the cost of incense offset the marginal gain in honey weight. Scholarly debate. You move to a shady grove where a circle of beekeepers sits cross-legged, each holding a clay bowl of honey and a bronze mirror. They peer into the mirrors and gently blow honey onto the reflective surface, reciting silent prayers to Re. The reflection of sunlit honey on metal was thought to multiply its potency, as though doubling the blessing. You hold up your own mirror, an ornate bronze disc, and pour honey in a steady drop. Caught by competition, two keepers vie to see whose honey shines brighter. You chuckle, joke 3-0 like competitive honey mirror selfies. At the grove's edge stands an obelisk-shaped stone inscribed with a single bee glyph. Locals leave offerings of mead and fresh comb at its base, a votive to secure bountiful hives next year. You sprinkle a handful of pollen bits around its foot. The obelisk's shadow moves as the sun arcs, and when it aligns, you sense a pulse as if the hive's heartbeat resonates with stone and soil. Fringe tidbit some whispered that on the solstice, the obelisk spoke in a buzzing rhythm, guiding harvest timing, though most scholars see it as allegory. Rather than literal oracular function, scholarly debate. As the sun dips toward horizon, you trudge back through skeps, your cloak dusted with stray pollen and your satchel lined with tiny amulet shards. The smoke still clings to your hair, the reed baskets still echo with distant bee chorus. You think on these quirky rites, dung-fueled smoke henbane haze, amber charms, honey-scented traps, incense-laced drafts, mirror rituals, and solstice stones. Each odd practice speaks to a deeper truth. Beekeepers across millennia have woven creativity and superstition into their craft, forging a relationship with bees that blended science, art, and magic. You pause at the apiary gate, the day's last light, painting the skeps in russet glow. You finger the little faience bee amulet in your pocket, a token of 1,000 whispered promises. Tomorrow dawns with new trials, brood checks, smoke tests, jar seals. Yet tonight the hives hum not with honey's promise alone, but with echoes of every eccentric ritual that sweetened Pharaoh's realm and kept bees both mystified and blessed. The boundary between keeper and kept has never been stickier or more enchanting. You trudge through the half-ruined courtyard of a once glorious temple, now draped in Persian banners, the air thick with damp stone and drifting dust rather than honeyed warmth. Columns that once bore reliefs of bees buzzing in orderly procession now stand pocked by weather and neglect, vine tendrils creeping across carved hive scenes. Your fingers brush chipped basalt icons of Neith's bee motif, and you taste the grit of foreign rule in every crumb that falls from your cloak. The familiar hum of hives has faded here, replaced by distant trumpets and the chatter of satraps. Persian soldiers lounge beneath walnut trees where clay skeps once clustered their bright mail coats glinting in the midday sun. You approach a chipped hive stand that's been repurposed as a bench the bee ridges worn smooth by the boots of occupying troops. Mainstream fact: after Cambyses II conquered Egypt around 525 BCE, administrative reforms and heavy tribute demands led to neglect of local crafts, including state-supported apiaries, as noted in scattered papyri of the period. You imagine temple beekeepers sidelined by tax collectors, their sacred work eclipsed by empire's demands. Joke one who knew even bees could be victims of budget cuts. You wander down a colonnade to find a lone clay skep, overturned, its entrance clogged with cobwebs and the bones of a single brood cell. Near its base lies a broken amphora once filled with premium palace honey, now half buried in fallen columns. You kneel, brushing away debris to reveal faded ring and dot glyphs, the maker's mark. Fringe tidbit: some accounts claim that under Achaemenid rule, foreign governors introduced Babylonian date honey strains to Egyptian hives in hopes of boosting yields, though historians still argue whether those crossbreeds thrived in the Nile's unique terroir or simply perished. Unremarked scholarly debate. A bristly old farmer in russet robes approaches leaning on a staff carved with a scarab handle. He kneels at your side and mutters, "No bees since the king's tax reform." He lifts a handful of sandy soil and lets it slip through his fingers. "The hives swarmed once like living suns," he says. "Now they're ghosts." You feel a pang of regret. This decline wasn't natural, but born of policy. You trudge along a canal brimming with lilies, now choked by silt, the floodplain's rhythm disrupted by new irrigation canals built for Persian grain quotas. Where reeds once provided forage, only algae and stagnant water remain. You bend to dip your finger in the slime, an acrid taste of ambition. The absence of nectar for blooms meant swarms starved before reaching spring, and apiary yields plummeted. Joke 2: looks like the only thing flooding now is the satrap's ledger. As the sun arcs high, you seek shade under a date palm grove where a small cluster of hives still stands, tended by a solitary keeper in fringed indigo. He waves you over, his eyes hollow with worry. On a low table, he offers you a jar of scant honey, pale, thin, and brimming with sediment. You tasted a ghost of former glory, sweet but sour-edged by neglect. He tells you that since the Persians levied honey as part of the new tribute in kind, only a fraction was left for local use. Mainstream fact: Persian tribute records list honey among the province's deliverables, a shift from temple-controlled distribution to imperial tax systems, as attested on tablets from Elephantine. You stand by his skeps and watch as he smokes them with a handful of reed litter, coaxing out what little brood remains. His hands shake, part age, part nerve fray, from constant fear of confiscation. Fringe tidbit: he murmurs about using crushed mandrake root to sedate the bees into producing just one harvest a year, a practice he believes originates from Iranian apiarists, though modern scholars still debate whether mandrake's psychoactive compounds ever truly aided honey flow. or simply intoxicated both bees and keepers alike. Scholarly debate. You tip your head back and recall a conversation in the temple's apothecary where old scroll fragments warned of foreign incursion harming both temple worship and hives. You remember using honeymead cures for coughs. Now those remedies require traveling days upriver to find sufficient stock. The liquid scarcity echoes in your gut like a hollow drum. Night falls, and you sit beside a flickering oil lamp, no wax available for beeswax candles, and write hieroglyphic notes on a clay shard. Apiaries starve when state forgot. You press the pointed stylus into soft clay, recording the hive's demise. Each stroke is heavier than the last, a testament to decline. By dawn, the Hellenistic armies arrive, new rulers under Alexander's successors. You wander among Greek merchants inspecting hives, their sharpened sensibilities regarding apiculture clashing with Egyptian traditions. They eye the clay skeps, then propose exporting Egyptian honey to Mediterranean markets. You shake your head, too little remains. The Greek scribes laugh, calling it nod to archaic charm. You taste irony, your homeland's sweetness reduced to nostalgic novelty. Joke 3. Trade winds carry many things, but not all honey makes it past ruin. You trudge back toward the old temple, now shadowed by new columns bearing Greek inscriptions. They depict Dionysian scenes, wine grapes, not honey. The hives stand neglected, waiting for a revival that may never come. Your heart aches as you slip your hand into a reed basket swung at your side, empty. You swallow dust coating your throat and vow to preserve these practices in memory and study. Even as Persian and Hellenistic rule eclipsed Egyptian apiculture, you carry the legacy as sticky and persistent as honey itself. The empire may change, but the hum of history never fades. You kneel in a dusty trench as the bright morning sun filters through scaffolding, illuminating fragments of clay and charcoal-stained reed. Around you, modern Egyptologists brush soil away from the rim of broken skep, revealing ridges too perfect to be natural erosion. Your trowel scrapes gently, each whisper of clay against metal, echoing like a distant hive hum. You imagine the ancient hand that shaped this vessel, now silent beneath layers of sediment. Joke 1. Archaeology, the only profession where you literally dig up ancient garbage and call it treasure. A lead archaeologist in cargo pants and indigo hat beckons you closer. She points to a charred patch inside the skep's base, a telltale sign of smoke usage. Mainstream fact excavations at the site of Deir el-Banat in 2012 uncovered dozens of clay skeps, reed smokers, and iron tongs, confirming textual references to apiary tools from the New Kingdom period. You brush away earth to expose tiny wax remnants preserved in a sealed cell glinting like fossilized honey. The find binds textual lore to tangible relic, a sweet bridge across millennia. You pass a colleague who sifts a soil sample through a fine mesh, separating pollen grains from sand. Under her microscope, each pollen type, acacia sycamore date, blossoms maps, past bloom calendars. Quirky tidbit, one pollen analysis controversially found traces of imported European heather pollen, suggesting cross-Mediterranean bee migrations or clerical contamination. But historians still argue whether that heather ever truly made it to Egypt, or if it's just lab crosstalk scholarly debate. You blink, imagining bees in lab coats, trading pollen like bartering merchants. Beyond the trench, a wooden crate holds a spectrum of uncovered artifacts, reed baskets, stained amber bronze fire tongs, pitted with age, and alabaster jars half filled with crystallized honey. Your fingers hover over a smoking box, its vents carved into ornate patterns that mirror palace reliefs. You lift the lid. A rush of earthy aroma wafts out a living ghost of ancient practices. You chuckle, joke two modern offices could learn a thing or two about natural air fresheners. Nearby, a conservator sprays a gentle mist of distilled water over a papyrus fragment inscribed with beekeeping instructions. Each ink stroke reappears as moisture settles in the fibers. You peer at hieroglyphs detailing hive placement and harvest timing. This scrap was once lost, now recovered. Mainstream fact: the papyrus, carbon dated to circa 1350 BCE, was found in a burial cache near Thebes and provides explicit calendar-based guidelines for apiary care, enriching our understanding beyond temple reliefs. You trace the faint word for honey with your fingertip, careful not to smear the ink. A fringe theory surfaces. Some suggest these recovered skeps were actually ceremonial replicas, not working hives intended solely for tomb inclusion. Historians still argue whether such replicas served liturgical roles, or whether artisans simply replicated utilitarian shapes in funerary contexts. Scholarly debate. You scratch your chin imagining ceremonial hives dusted with funerary oils, beekeeping as performance art for the afterlife. You stand and stretch, sun warming your spine as you gaze at a row of in situ hives, their bases nestled into original wooden stands now rotting beneath earth. Wooden supports once painted in saffron and teal peak from the soil, each beam a chapter of daily labor. You picture generations of keepers rotating hives, repairing coils, and coaxing swarms beneath the same sun. The sight pulses with human rhythm beyond death. A slender rope cordons off an area where structural beams indicate a possible beekeeping workshop. You step inside, gingerly avoiding modern reinforcement rods, and spot a half-carved wooden bucket, a vessel for honey-laden combs. Its interior is blackened with pitch residue, and you run your palm along its rim, feeling centuries-old grooves. Joke 3. Talk about an aged barrel. Just add wine and call it a fancy winery. Your gaze drifts to a nearby display case where a digital reconstruction cycles through 3D renderings of an entire apiary layout, raised platforms, reed corridors, smoke vents, all arranged in a precise grid. Each click reveals pollen dispersal patterns, drainage channels, and airflow simulations. You marvel at how technology resurrects ancient designs, yet you remember that those original builders crafted brilliance with a clay reed and keen observation alone. A team leader invites you to participate in a small extraction, freeing a sealed brood frame block encased in ash. You don gloves and, under her guidance, use a scalpel to lift the compressed clay cap. Beneath it, comb shapes emerge in ghostly relief, empty but intact. You brush off the ash, revealing the cell patterns as if frozen mid-harvest. Your heart flutters, you're touching evidence of newborn bees that never hatched, a poignant echo of life's fragility. As evening's golden light fills the dig, you gather with the team to label finds: skep, 47A fire tongue fragment, 12B brood block C3. Each artifact tag is a promise to remember a sticky marker on the map of history. You write your initials next to a freshly unearthed wax remnant vial, a small claim to posterity's hive record. Walking back to camp, you brush a hand across a limestone column dotted with ancient bee reliefs. They seem to wink at you in twilight shadow, their carved wings catching the last rays. You think on the centuries of neglect, rediscovery, and modern revival, all orbiting around these humble hives. Egyptologists have pieced together a narrative of beekeeping from shards and scrolls. Yet some questions linger. Did hive practices vary regionally? Or did a central temple authority standardize them? Did beekeepers share secrets across nomadic routes, or jealously guard them as temple privileges? Historians still debate these threads as they untangle the past's honeyed skein. You close your eyes and inhale the mingled scents of dust, beeswax, and evening Nile breeze. This ancient apiary, silent for millennia, now hums again in your mind, a testament to human craft devotion and sweet innovation. You realize that rediscovery is a dance between present curiosity and past practice. Each scoop of earth revealing a stanza in the kingdom's sweet symphony. Dusk falls as you sit by a flickering camp lantern, the skip fragments laid out before you like cosmic puzzle pieces. You savor a small taste of crystallized honey from a recovered jar, a final link to beekeepers' past. Its flavor is mellow, floral, and fiery with history. You swallow, feeling it warm your chest, and whisper thanks to those who first coaxed bees into clay vessels thousands of years ago. You stand at a modern open-air market in Cairo, where the scent of fresh pita and spice stalls mingles with jars of honey glinting like liquid gold under the midday sun. Market-goers in indigo and teal robes sample spoonfuls of clover acacia and date flower honeys, each labeled with a tiny bee emblem, reminiscent of those ancient skeps you once tended by the Nile. The past feels alive here, buzzing beneath your fingertips as you swirl honey over warm flatbread, recalling how Pharaoh's beekeepers first perfected these flavors millennia ago. Mainstream fact contemporary Egyptian apiculture still relies on clay skeps and reed smokers in rural areas, a direct inheritance from antiquity that sustains over 28,000 registered beekeepers across the country. You wander down an alley lined with boutique shops selling beeswax candles carved into lotus and scarab shapes. A shopkeeper in a saffron apron presses a small candle of rose-scented beeswax into your palm. You lean in, inhaling the sweet floral aroma mingled with faint resin, a sensory echo of the temple rituals you studied. Joke 1, never underestimate the ancient power of a good-smelling candle to hide taco truck regrets. Beyond the market, you find a cafe where honey-infused falafel is the daily special. You bite into a warm patty studded with chickpeas and drizzled with a sharp, sweet pomegranate honey glaze. The crunch and syrup dance on your tongue, an unexpected culinary legacy of honey's journey from royal tribute to street food staple. Fringe tidbit: some food historians suggest the combination of legumes and honey in savory dishes was first recorded on a 3,000-year-old inscribed pot fragment, though scholars still argue whether that fragment actually contained a honey recipe or was merely decorative scholarly debate. You duck into a small museum annex dedicated to beekeeping heritage. Wooden models of ancient hives stand beside interactive 3D displays showing pollen routes across the Nile Delta. A touchscreen map traces grain and honey trade from Memphis to the Aegean, underscoring honey's role as both commodity and cultural connector. A panel quotes a classical Greek writer praising Egyptian honey as nectar of the gods, a line you read with a wink. Joke 2. Turns out Homer was basically a foodie influencer. Atop a low pedestal sits a modern reproduction of the Meroruca tomb relief bees, carved in crisp limestone by contemporary artisans. You press your palm against its cool surface, imagining the scrawled hieroglyphs you once traced by torchlight. Nearby, a video loop shows archaeologists extracting wax remnants from clay skeps, the same practice that resurrected ancient flavors in lab settings. You recall that experimental brews of honey-laced mead once allowed scientists to taste Near Eastern vintages, a bold revival of old world recipe. Stepping outside, you pass a row of olive trees where a community cooperative manages demonstration apiaries. You wear protective netting and kneel beside a group of rustic clay skeps painted in ochre stripes. A local beekeeper hands you a reed smoker filled with dried date palm fronds. You puff gentle smoke into a hive and lift a comb to reveal glistening frames. The bees buzz in calm acknowledgement as though they too recognize the weight of history on your shoulders. Mainstream fact, these cooperative apiaries often involve family-run operations that pass down hive care through generations, maintaining techniques documented on papyrus scrolls from the New Kingdom era. You join a workshop where participants craft beeswax cosmetics, lip balms, moisturizers, and eye kohl using recipes pulled from revived Ebers and Hearst papyrus sections. Under guidance, you melt beeswax with sesame oil and a touch of kohl for a smoky eye paste. The paste glides on your eyelid like silk, a direct descendant of temple beauty routines you once witnessed. Fringe tidbit local lore claims that women sleeping with a bit of honey salve on their skin would dream of past lives, though historians still debate whether such beauty rites doubled as mnemonic devices for spiritual visions or were simply elaborate marketing pitches. Scholarly debate. By evening, you join a rooftop feast overlooking the Nile. Lanterns of beeswax cast honeyed light over platters of stuffed grape leaves, honey-drizzled baklava, and date mead cocktails garnished with fresh mint. You raise a glass of amber liquid and toast the unseen beekeepers of the past. You taste the legacy sweet, complex, and often bitter when you recall the taxed hives, foreign neglect, and apothecary trials that shaped this heritage. A local chef introduces a new dish, honey-infused full medames, topped with toasted cumin and olive oil. You scoop a spoonful and let the interplay of savory beans and sweet nectar linger. You chuckle as you note how the simplest ingredient bee-crafted sweetness drives culinary creativity from ancient palaces to modern street stalls. Joke 3. I'd say that's food for thought, but really it's just food. As the moon rises over the river, you stroll back through lantern-lit alleys, your satchel now full of wildflower honey and beeswax trinkets. The hum of the city fades into a distant roar, replaced by the soft cricket chorus. You feel a kinship with bee and beekeeper alike, both creatures of industrious habit, creating sweetness from toil and tragedy. You pause on a wooden bridge, gazing at the Nile's mirrored surface shimmering with light. You realize that honey's journey from temple offerings to trade exports, from apothecary elixirs to gastronomic innovations, has woven itself into Egypt's lifeblood. The hive's legacy endures not just in jars, but in every bite of cuisine, every glowing candle, and every whispered prayer to be gods both ancient and modern. You tuck a final jar of honey into your pack, its amber depths reflecting moonlight. You whisper thanks to the long line of keepers, Pharaoh's first apiarians, temple healers, logistics masters, and every modern shepherd of hives who sweetened kingdoms across time. Their legacy buzzes within you, a resonant echo that promises tomorrow's harvests will be as rich as the past's golden tapestry. Now the market lights dim, and the lantern's golden glow softens into a gentle twilight. You stand by the riverside, the Nile's slow current, murmuring a lullaby beneath rippling reflections. Breathe in the cool night air, honeyed with distant incense and heady with the earth's own sweetness. Each layer of aroma, from crushed flower to beeswax flame, seeps into your lungs, easing tension from your shoulders and softening the day's edges. Close your eyes and feel your feet grounded on ancient paths once trod by those earliest beekeepers, each footprint a link in a chain of sticky devotion. Imagine the clay skips lining temple courtyards, the smoky hush of reed burners, and the soft murmur of countless hives. You are both traveler and keeper, carrying their hum within you like a shared heartbeat. Let the honey's legacy wash over you, its warmth, complexity, and resilience. Release regrets like spent comb scraps, knowing that even the sweetest harvests demand trials and stings. Feel the gentle buzz of history settle into your bones, a comforting vibration that reminds you innovation and ritual can coexist. Commerce and devotion can intertwine, and from the humblest hive can spring the grandest symbols of power and care. As the moon's pale glow guides you homeward, whisper gratitude to the silent bees whose gifts sustained dynasties and nourished souls. Tonight, let their sacred sweetness cradle your dreams. Drift into sleep, knowing that tomorrow holds new nectar, new discoveries, and the promise of golden days to come. End of script. Sweet dreams.